Hi everyone, I'm Mark Nelson, Collections Manager here at History Colorado. Today I wanted to invite you in for a little behind the scenes look at some of our storage spaces at the History Colorado Center. Right now I'm standing in our 4th floor storage space at the center, and on this floor alone we have over 100,000 individual objects that we have in storage. And this space is primarily used for storing our three-dimensional objects. Today though, what I really want to show you is how we store many of our textiles in our collection. At the History Colorado Center, we have around 15,000 items in the textile collection. And with a collection of that size, there's a number of different formats and ways that we actually store and care for these pieces. So that's what I'm going to be showing you. So if you want to follow me over here, I'll show you one of the first ways, and that is our rolled textile storage. So here I am, I'm standing in what is really one of many aisles where we have rolled textiles. And the types of materials that you're going to find here, the types of materials that we roll, are usually large, flat textiles like blankets, quilts, and flags, and things of that nature really. And the reason we decide to roll them is that with large textiles, typically yourself or me at home, we would probably fold that up and put it into a closet, which works fine most of the time. But many of these textiles are decades to even over 100 years old. And as the textile starts to age, it becomes much more fragile. And so when you fold that up, those folds actually can really do damage to it in the long term. You may notice that when you take a blanket out of the closet, even after a couple of months, you can really see the lines of where it's been folded. And those really become permanent over many, many years. And that's something we're trying to avoid. Also, it's those folds that really start to wear down, and the textile can tear or rip on those edges, and obviously that is something that we're really trying to avoid with our collection here. So that's why we decided to roll them. And it's actually a pretty simple process to get them rolled. We take a textile, we lay it out flat on a table, and then we cover it in archival tissue, and we will end up rolling it up on an archival tube like this one here. And then that allows us to, we'll bring it up here, and we're able to put it on a rack and lock it into place by inserting a metal rod through it. And this way of storing textiles isn't just really good for preservation purposes, but it's also a really efficient way of storing things, I think. As you can see in here, there's dozens of textiles, and I think it really doesn't take up that much space. If you were to fold them, I think there would be a lot more space taken up by all these textiles. So this is a really great way to store them. And this is really just one of what are 3 ways that we store textiles. So why don't we head back your way and we'll take a look at our second way of storing textiles here at History Colorado. So if you follow me down here, we have a number of different aisles where we store box textiles. And that's what we're going to take a look at. So let's go down here. This is actually the first row of a number of rows where we have box textiles. As you can see on the left, we have boxes of all different shapes and sizes on these shelves. And if you were to pull a box off and take a look inside, you're going to find a real range of material. Really any sort of textile that could fit in a box, we're probably going to store it in a box. This is our primary way of storing textiles. So if you were to take a box out too, you might find 1 item in it, or you might find a dozen items in it. It really depends on the size of the textile and what's best for storing it. But another reason you might find multiple items in one box is that here at History Colorado, we try and store like materials together. So take, for example, if you had a small box, you pull it up, you might find a couple dozen thin handkerchiefs all stored together. That's something that we do here. And that also goes for when we bring in new items into our collection. One of my responsibilities is to find a storage place for it. And so I will actually go and seek out those boxes that have just handkerchiefs in it, and I'll put it in it and I'll store it with the other ones like that. I would be remiss though if I did not mention the storage that we have over here. We don't have a lot of drawer storage for our textiles, but we do have some. And what we use these for are exclusively for the wedding dresses in our collection. Why don't we take a look in this drawer right here. So you can see we have 2 relatively small wedding dresses, but the reason we decided to store wedding dresses in drawers rather than boxes is that they're fairly large textiles. And if we put them in a box, it's going to require a large box, and they actually really want to fit on the shelves that we have. and they certainly would take up a lot of space. So this is really a much more efficient way of storing them, and it allows us to save space on the shelves for other textiles. So before we move on, I actually have a specific item that I think is really interesting that I want to share with you. So I'm going to grab this box off the shelf, and why don't we head to a table and we'll take a look at it. So I was looking for an interesting item to share in this video, and I sort of accidentally stumbled across this, and I'm really glad I did because I think it's really interesting. I'm going to put on some gloves to help show you this a little better. But what do we have here is a tent fragment. Pull this back. So it looks like a relatively ordinary tent fragment, but the provenance or the history of the piece is really fascinating. So this tent fragment is actually said to be a piece of the original tent that was used by Lieutenant John Charles Fremont in his 1842 expedition to survey the Oregon Trail. This also has a really unique connection to a frontiersman and scout that I think most Coloradans will know, and that is Kit Carson. So the story of this goes that Fremont hired Carson, well, in general, Fremont hired Carson to guide a number of his expeditions. And over several years, they explored the Central Rocky Mountains, Oregon, and California together. And there are actually holes in this piece, which I'll pull this back. You can see a hole right here, for example. The holes in this piece are said to have actually come from a skirmish with Indians at South Pass in what is now southern Wyoming. And it was after this tent was damaged that Fremont is reported to have actually given it to Kit Carson for his own use. So I think this is a really interesting piece. It really shows, it's not just an interesting piece because it has great connections to people in Colorado history, but I also think it shows the diversity of textiles that we have in the collection here. When I say textile, I think most people think of clothing or quilts and things of that nature, but there are a lot of really interesting pieces in this collection that fall within the textile collection, just like this. So now we've taken a look at that. Why don't we head over? We're going to check out our third and final storage format. You can follow me right this way. So in this area, we have a number of different aisles that we have hanging clothing, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. This is one of many hanging clothing aisles, and you might be able to see in this aisle in particular, we have a lot of military jackets in this space. Our hanging clothing collection is actually around 5,000 individual pieces, which we store over here. And it seems obvious, but the type of material that we hang are the sort of things that you would normally hang on a hanger. We have jackets, winter coats, blouses, shirts like mine, things like that. And I'm actually going to be undertaking a major project to rehouse all of our hanging clothing collection very soon. You can see that almost all the pieces are in these plastic coverings, which are okay, but what would really be best for improving the preservation of these pieces is to move them into a fabric covering. So myself, working with a number of volunteers, we're going to be taking these individual pieces, we'll take them down, and we're going to create a custom fabric covering that will go over it. And that will really help with the long-term preservation of these pieces. In particular, textiles are very light sensitive and can be damaged by light. So having a fabric covering will go a long way in helping to better preserve and store these into the future. Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this behind the scenes look at some of our storage space. I've really enjoyed it. I encourage you to stay tuned. Coming up in the near future, I'll be hosting a preservation webinar, and I will be looking at how we store box textiles in our collection and some of the techniques that we use to do that. And there will also be some tricks that you can use at home to help preserve something that might be important to you. But I encourage you to continue to explore collections and go online to historycolorado.org.